I'm Greg Wanless. I'm the chair of the QUFA Council, and you are members of QUFA. We have a couple of housekeeping comments to make. One is the meeting, as I'm sure you know, is being webcast. That means, please, anything you would like to ask needs to be asked at a microphone, so those folks who are online and in Tahiti can share our conversation for sure. If you can't make it to a microphone, I'm sure that one of our staff members, perhaps Leslie, or someone close by, would relay the question, please. Okay, so I'm calling, the other comment, please, is would you identify yourself for our intrepid minute taker? Thank you. Okay, beginning now at 1:21, could we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented, as circulated? Thank you. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Carried. Thanks very much. Circulated as well were the April 19th, our spring AGM minutes. They were attached to as an email. No, they were an email attachment. Could we have a motion, please, to accept those minutes?
Diana Hoffman, trustee.
Thank you. And Michael White. All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. Carried. Is there any business arising from those minutes? Okay. Our President Kyle has a comment to make before we move to the order of the day. Thanks, Kyle.
Okay, I got the signal. In view of the importance of the order of the day, I'm going to turn the floor directly over to Elizabeth Hanson and Rob Hickey, our co-chief negotiators. Any questions to the President will be taken up under other business after our meeting is completed. So I'll turn the floor over to our co-chief negotiators.
Sorry, am I clicking the right ones?
One more?
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, is this good? People can hear properly? Excellent. Okay, I'm Elizabeth Hanson. I'm a co-chief negotiator with Rob Hickey for QUFA's 2018 round of collective bargaining. I'm going to provide some of the context for this somewhat unusual round of bargaining, and then Rob is going to talk to people about the meat of the deal, what we got, and what it means going forward. So I want to start with context for this very compressed round of bargaining in advance of the normal period of bargaining, which we usually do in the winter months in advance of the expiry of the agreement on April 30. As many of you may be aware, since 2015, QUFA, Queen's University, the Administration and Faculty Association of the Universities of Toronto and the University of Guelph, and the United Steelworkers have been engaged in designing a multi-employer jointly sponsored pension plan. The aim of this project is to provide a pension plan for university sector employees that provides good pensions to employees without encumbering the operating budgets of universities with pension costs. Those of you who were at Queen's in the exciting year of 2011 may also recall that in that bargaining round, when we came within hours of striking, the university sought and won increased pension contribution rates and other adjustments to address going concern and solvency deficits in the QPP. And despite these adjustments, so we gave in that round increased contributions and some other adjustments to the plan, the QPP remains in deficit. And as of 2017, there was a 121 million going concern deficit and about a 300 million solvency deficit. It may have dropped a bit this year, but as Paul Young says, those are still big numbers. Moreover, in 2012, the Ontario government imposed special solvency payments on the university sector. It's generally thought for the purpose of driving the single employer pension plans of the university sector into a jointly sponsored pension plan. JSPPs, jointly sponsored pension plans, as multi-employer plans have presumptive greater stability and therefore are not required to make solvency payments. While the imposition of these payments is often characterized as political, the government was pursuing a genuine policy objective, which was to force a restructuring of pensions that would limit the exposure of university operating budgets to pension deficits, and the government more generally to the effect of any possible, although obviously unlikely, instability in institutions. So the 2012 imposition of solvency payments, which were to begin in 2015, although they've dangled the sword of Damocles of these payments over universities, or they did it for a few more years as a threat, it powerfully concentrated the minds of the university administrations in some unfortunate ways. Most notably, including at Queen's, university administrations began expressing interest in merging their single employer pension plans with the JSPP for the college system, known as the CAT plan, which in our view offered crummy benefits for excessive contribution rates. It would have been a real loss for our members. This unattractive prospect in turn concentrated the minds at QUFA, the Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations, to consider the possibility of building a new sector-wide JSPP that would be designed for the career paths and income levels of university faculty. So in 2014, the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities gave the nod to QUFA, the COU, the Council of Ontario Universities, which represents the administrative side, and a number of public sector unions to begin exploration of the development of a sector-wide, jointly sponsored pension plan. Though the number of participants, which was insane, all with their different interests to be reconciled, proved unwieldy. And so in 2017, several universities withdrew in order to simplify the building with the prospect of joining once the plan was built. And, there's also other drama related to other unions, but it's a slightly different story. So the unions, the three faculty associations and the USW, have been as committed to this project as the university administrations, though in this commitment, they've been representing different interests. QUFA's commitment has been both pragmatic and principled. Its pragmatic motives include the recognition that in the special solvency payments, the government has the means to inflict real pain on the universities, who in turn can pass it on to our members. A merger with the CAT plan is one form the pain could take. QUFA has a veto over changes to the QPP in our collective agreement. All that means, however, as I learned personally in 2011, is that they can't change the plan until the agreement is open. And then they could lock us out for an entire summer until we consented to such a merger. Another form of pain comes from solvency payments, which the university has actually begun paying this year, I believe, and which remove money from the operating budget. Right now at Queen's, we are looking at a 6% tax on units, which translates pretty directly into worsening working conditions for our members. The principled motives include the recognition that the QPP has indeed now had a fairly prolonged going concern deficit, and this amounts to an intergenerational debt transfer. It behooves us to fix that. Moreover, a JSPP is actually a better pension solution for all QUFA members, since its multi-employer character increases its political power, while its joint sponsorship gives employees control over decisions about the plan. Under a JSPP, if the plan goes into surplus, employers cannot take a pension holiday. Surplus must stay with the plan. So there's no possibility of a cascade of events where, yippee, there's money, they take a holiday, oops, there's a deficit, now you have to make increased contributions or your benefits get diminished. Because of both their scale and their jointly sponsored character, they're less vulnerable either to provincial or local political climate changes. We were joking that it would be like a Mike Harris piggybacking on a Alan Harrison to get the perfect Harris storm. For all these reasons, it's been pretty clear to us that if our responsibility is to ensure pension benefits for our members, or to make this point a little more sharply, if we want to guarantee that the old economy good of a staple and ample defined benefit pension is going to be available for future generations of academic staff, then building the UPP was the right course. So now we get to where we are. The UPP was more or less built in October of this year after a ridiculously protracted process with all these unions and universities in endless haggling. And a schedule for the consent process was established. For reasons that have to do with the next stages of regulatory oversight, the universities, that is the employers, need the consent voting to be concluded by February, a fact that was only disclosed earlier this fall. So that led us to what we have called speed bargaining. It meant that QUFA also had to accelerate its normal bargaining schedule because the universities need for our consent vote to have occurred, for them to know one way or another what we're going to do. The consent vote to pension conversion, it gave us real leverage at the table to get both conversion offsets and a reasonable renewed agreement. And we also had signed an LOA, that LOA in 2015 that stated that were consent to occur within 6 months of the expiry of the agreement, consent would be bargained. So we had to get going. Also, I want to note that the fact that our consent, the fact that we had to give it, gave us leverage at the bargaining table, is one reason for a sort of curious double position that QUFA has assumed, where we have been partners in the building of this plan, but we have remained neutral about its advisability, because if we cheer for the plan, then the universities got us, and there's no leverage in bargaining. The university, therefore, has been conducting education about the UPP, but QUFA has not, up to this point. Okay, so we decide to speed bargain, focusing on the pension offsets and the monetary elements of a renewed agreement, and to limit normative matters to a very short list of items that were already under discussion by the parties. And these could be dealt with by memoranda of agreement rather than the endless, tedious, mind-numbing haggling over language, which is what normally makes QUFA's bargaining so protracted. We were comfortable bargaining in that limited way with respect to normative issues because the 2015 round had been a very deep dive into the normative language that makes up the bulk of the collective agreement. So we successfully concluded bargaining yesterday. The deal we got is contingent on QUFA's consent to the merger of the QPP with the UPP, and that process will be described by Rob Hickey. Today, what we're now going to do is explain the contents of the agreement that we got and then outline next steps with respect to the consent and ratification process, including intensive education and guidance for members on the decision that they will have to make and all the events related to that process that will be forthcoming in the month of January. So over to Rob.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And just to apologize, if you're wondering why we have to keep the lights so bright, it's because of the web streaming. Otherwise, we'll be kind of in the dark up here. And we don't want to give the impression that we're in the dark. Rather, we want to shed light on what we've concluded. So first, I want to go over what our objectives were, just to kind of highlight what is it that we wanted going in. And it was pretty clear. Why it's not, there we go, that we have two tracks. We had the consent bargaining track and we had the collective agreement renewal track. And it's kind of important to keep these distinct because one really is focused on what does it take to ensure that we have a deal worth going into in terms of the conversion from the QPP to the UPP. Now for us, we didn't want to see the offsets that we might gain in consent bargaining simply be taken out of our pockets in contract renewal bargaining. So we were clear with the administration that these are two tracks, but they're intricately linked. And so this is what we went into. We recognize that contribution rates will increase, and we wanted a salary offset to mitigate those cost increases for members. Recognizing that the UPP is not going to allow for activation of your pension and continuation of work at Queens. We wanted to have a phased retirement plan. We thought that that would be a model that would provide some offset, although in a different model in terms of what members would not be able to access from the QPP. And we took the University of Toronto plan as the model, and I'll explain some of the elements of that in a moment. Recognizing that our retired members have what essentially amounts to a veto. We made it clear to the administration that we'd like to see some post-retirement benefit enhancements in the collective agreement, meaning what can we provide to retirees even though clearly they maintain all of their current QPP pension benefits in a new UPP. How do we induce them to be supportive and not just neutral in this process? Under the Pension Benefit Act, there's a kind of a minimum eligibility threshold, and we wanted to align that with the minimum eligibility threshold that is prescribed in the collective agreement. Currently, you have to have a little bit more in terms of courses or hours than what was in the PBA. Finally, given our perception that pensions is one of the issues that can really get members riled up, we felt that it was important that if we convert, if we take pension bargaining away from our collective bargaining relationship and put it into a jointly sponsored plan that will have joint governance and no longer be part of the realm of collective bargaining, we wanted an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. Some of you might remember there was a DRM, a dispute resolution mechanism, that was taken away 2011?
No, 2008.
2008. That provides for interest arbitration if the parties reach impasse in monetary bargaining. So we decided to propose the reintroduction of the DRM, given our concerns that if you take pension off the table, we're not sure that our members will be quite that engaged to resist more aggressive bargaining from the administration in the future. In terms of the collective agreement renewal, kind of the other track, a fair annual increase. We looked at what the trends were at other post-secondary institutions. Initially, we thought a one-year rollover agreement just to focus on the pension, but looking at the kind of political environment and how that translates into the bargaining environment, we don't think that the current provincial government will make post-secondary financing any better, so we're looking for a 3-year agreement. We wanted to maintain mechanisms for the anomalies side table. Again, this wasn't looking for putting a lot of money into the anomalies side table, but to have a mechanism to ensure that QUFA and Queens can identify and address anomalies across units. And finally, the one substantive element that could kind of be the advance that we were looking for was to recognize our colleagues who are promoted from continuing adjunct to associate and feeling that we need to provide some recognition of that promotion and some support for their research agenda. So what did we get? In terms of the tentative agreement for consent, the first item was a harmonization with the normal retirement date. So currently in Queens, it's July 1st after you turn 65. So those of you born in August, you'll be almost 66 before you reach your normal retirement date. They've agreed to harmonize that as of July 1st, 2019. It's good, it's right. We would have been flabbergasted if they would have said no, because this is what the UPP is. So this is just bringing it in line with what we know is going to happen. I study collective bargaining. I'm not often surprised by employer actions, but I was surprised by this next step, because it's not often that we see employers bringing to the table their own ideas about benefit enhancements. And this was an employer offer, right? It wasn't in the objectives that we brought to the table. They have they have offered unreduced early retirement to make it basically in line with what exists in the UPP. And if any of you have heard me talk about before when I was talking about the plan design and how the UPP is an advancement in terms of unreduced early retirement, I often tried to quickly constrain the enthusiasm by pointing out that this is for the next generation of Queen's colleagues. Paul and I, when this issue was coming up, we had multiple discussions saying, well, can't we do a little bit of something? And nope, nope, nope. But here in bargaining, they brought this to the table, and I think our team was being very agile, and you know, what we said was, well, we didn't propose that, but we'll take it. But we also want what we wanted before, because in the first time that we met, this is the only thing that they brought to the table. They didn't bring any offsets, they didn't bring any phased retirement, they didn't bring anything else. And we said, great, we'll take that, but go back and read our original proposal. And so sure enough, I think they got the message, and they came back with an offset, a modest offset, but an important offset. It's a one-time 1.5% salary increase to your pensionable earnings. And so there are a few provisos about this. One is it only applies to pensionable earnings, so it's not like the ATBs that I'll talk about in a moment that kind of apply across all the normal things that are adjusted by ATBs, like professional expenses and things like this. This is just to offset the contribution increases. And our contribution increases will be about well, it varies by your salary, but it's about 2.3, 2.38%. So this will offset a majority of that, about 62%, 63%. It is capped, so I have the reference there to the Canada Revenue Agency maximum limit. So this year that maximum limit is $165,000. So any earnings above $165,000 won't have this addition, right? So this is strictly an offset to the contribution increases. The other item that they came around on, and I think when they read our proposal, they realized that this is a really good idea, was a phased retirement based upon the University of Toronto model. And there are a few key elements to this model. First, it's a 3-year irrevocable plan, meaning starting July 1st, 2020, as long as you've reached age 62, you can say, I want to start phasing out my retirement. So over the next 3 years following, so starting July 1, 2021, and those 3 years, you'll reduce your duties, and there's kind of a parameter in terms of you can't work more than 200% over those 3 years, and you can't work less than 150%. But the main message is that when you go into the program, you get a 75% salary bonus, essentially, that is spread out over those 3 years. It's your pension buyout, so to speak, in terms of the incentive to enter this program. And perhaps most importantly, as why we think this is an appropriate and a valuable offset, is that you continue to earn your full pension credits even under your reduced responsibilities. So currently under the collective agreement, you can take reduced responsibilities, but it impacts your pension calculations, right? So under the phased retirement pension plan, you have 3 years of reduced responsibilities, 75% of salary offset or salary bonus, and continuing to accrue at full pension credits. And those can be significant. I'll use my own case as an example of showing, well, how much value is there in those 3 extra years, and there's quite a bit. Not surprisingly, I guess, they rejected the idea of an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. They told me they were a bit offended when I said, are you trying to be like York University, or are we just not talking correctly here in terms of bringing some stability to the labor relations environment to Queens? We thought it could be a good advert, right? It's a competitive advantage, but they're not interested. And frankly, you know, from my perspective, in terms of collective bargaining, I don't blame them. Parties want to remain in control of their own bargaining destiny. But what we did get, and this is just a minor offset in terms of perceived loss of some bargaining power, was if we convert to the UPP, the expiry date will move from April 30th to June 30th, with the idea being is that, you know, if they want to get aggressive again like they were in 2011, they won't set us up for a lockout on July 1st. Rather, they'll set us up for a lockout on September 1st, and they'll have a much different calculus to decide whether they want to play hardball at that time or not. So again, not something that we would anticipate being relevant to this discussion, but kind of looking down the future of how do we ensure continued bargaining practice. I think it is important. Finally, we did get a little bit of something. Dental benefits would have been wickedly expensive, and you know, that's unfortunate, but we did get the drug card added to post-retirement benefit. So some of you might recall last September we voted to approve changes to the group benefits plan at Queens, and during that entire review process of the group benefit plan, QUFA didn't have any standing to advocate on behalf of our retired colleagues. Although I did hear from many of them, and many of them were on this very issue, because once you turn 65, you have to start using paper forms again, right? You can't use online. There's a whole series of challenges to that, and this is one issue that I think will make a difference in the lives of our retired colleagues, of having a drug card just like we will in our own plan. Let me turn now to, and I'll come back and answer any questions on the details of that consent portion, but let me take a look at the monetary aspects of the tentative agreement. First is the across-the-board increases, and if you can't quite see it, it's 1.6, 1.6, 1.9. Nothing to particularly celebrate, but it's certainly within what we thought was the acceptable range for post-secondary settlements. So 1.6 May 1st, 1.6 May 1st, 2020, and then 1.9 in the last year. And again, we wanted to do that because we didn't want to have less than a 1% real increase during the year that the UPP could be going into effect, right? So you have the 1.5% salary offset and 1.9% ATB that year, so that comes out to 3.4%. And if the contribution rate increases are 2.4%, you'll still see a 1% increase in your salary that year. And these ATBs attribute, or they escalate all the elements within the collective agreement that are typically linked to across-the-board increases. So your stipends, your professional expenses, and all of the items that typically accelerate. We maintained the anomalies side table, and again, this was more just to ensure good practice on our part, to make sure that this doesn't fall by the wayside, that we can continue to have a mechanism to ensure accountability in the compensation structures across units. And we did get a little something to recognize the promotional achievements of our colleagues. So continuing adjuncts who are promoted to associate professor are granted a half-course teaching release if external research grant is obtained within 3 years. You can probably see the various geological layers of back and forth bargaining in that kind of lengthy benefit. But what it means essentially is that we've kind of got our foot in the door of being able to recognize the contributions of our colleagues who are continuing adjuncts who pass the same bar as the rest of us do in terms of being promoted to associate, and to try and provide them with at least some initial support for their research agenda. So I do think that was an important step forward. That's the substance of it. Let me, as Professor Hansen mentioned, let me say a couple of words about kind of the ratification and consent voting procedure. In most cases, you want to kind of vote as soon as you get the tentative agreement done, but in this case, we want to take our time. So we won't be voting on this package until the end of January, or probably more likely the beginning of February. The way we'd like to time it is that we're hoping to see the outcome from the University of Toronto and their consent vote to enter the UPP before we ask you to vote, right? We want to make sure that our colleagues at Toronto are about having the vote at about the same time, and so we're timing this to be in conjunction with them. But we also want to take our time to really make sure that everyone has time to fully sink their teeth into, well, what is the UPP and what does it mean to me? Now, we're not saying that you have to eat the full meal that Paul and I have suffered through over the last 3.5 years of getting so much information about actuarial estimates, but we do think that it will be important for everyone to feel fully confident in making an informed vote by February. And that vote will determine how QUFA responds in terms of consent or not. What we have in mind is kind of an extensive information sharing communication plan, including unit level consultations, including our own information sessions where we bring in QUFA's own actuarial and legal advisors. And the other thing I would encourage everyone in the room to do is to contact Bob Weisnagel at the Queen's Pension Office. Now, I did call him yesterday to give him a heads up that I was going to make this announcement, but Bob has been retiring our colleagues for the last 20 years here. If there's anyone who knows your pension benefits, don't ask me, ask Bob. He did tell me that I'm no longer on his Christmas card list, but I do hope that you take advantage of that resource, because he knows his stuff far better than anyone at the QUFA office will be able to tell you in terms of your current pension benefits. There are things that you can do, though, to kind of get yourself up to speed in terms of what we found to be useful for more information. If you haven't explored it yet, and I'll show you the example for myself, on the Queen's Pension site, there is a pension self-service tool. And it's kind of cool. You can plug in your expected retirement date, your age. There's some other key assumptions to plug in, and you can see what your estimated pension calculation is. However, when we do all this for our hybrid plan, and I think this is the most challenging notion to assess the movement from the QPP to the UPP, is that the hybrid nature of the Queen's plan makes a direct comparison impossible unless you have a set of assumptions going along with it. The only way to have a simple apple-to-apple comparison is if you only look at the minimum benefit guarantee. And we know that most faculty are able to retire out on the money purchase plan, on the kind of the hybrid, the DC portion of our plan. And any time you do that, it's built on a variety of assumptions when you're trying to project in the future. Why? Because the QPP money purchase value is inherently based upon market performance. And we all know that we're going to retire when the market is at its peak, and when it crashes, we'll be, in Mexico by then. So really clarify your assumptions when you're beginning to assess, is it better for me under the QPP or to shift to the UPP? The UPP doesn't have the hybrid nature, which is a loss, but it has a benefit accrual that is higher than the minimum benefit guarantee. The rate of return is key for us in terms of, again, My retirement date is July 1st, 2034. Not that that isn't burned into my mind or written in my calendar yet, but projecting what the rate of return will be over the next 15 years is guesswork, right? But that's what we need to do in order to estimate what our pension benefits are. We also need to have assumptions about what our annual salary increases will be over that period too. So anytime you're trying to estimate your QPP and compare it against the university pension plan proposal, keep in mind those assumptions. But there's one assumption that is actually central, and it's really the only assumption that matters, which is this last one. When are you going to die? And it's morbid, but it's true, because it depends on how long do I hope to enjoy my pension benefits. And when we make assumptions about when we die, it influences when we take retirement. If we continue to work past 65 and continue to accrue benefits, it allows us for a more reasonable comparison between the loss of being able to activate pension and continue to work versus a phased retirement program and then being fully out. And I'll use myself again as an example to show how assumptions really shape what the value difference is in this. And we do plan to have a similar tool to the pension self-service tool. But again, just to keep in mind that the self-service tool, and you'll see it on the website, they're all estimates because you have to make some pretty important assumptions. So this is my estimate. I know you can't quite read it, but let me walk you through. So this is me at my normal retirement date, July 1st, 2034. I have a spouse. The only thing I redacted was her birth date. I didn't think she'd want me sharing that with everyone today. But I have two important assumptions here. First, in the tool you can adjust this. I said, okay, is it reasonable? Yeah, I think it's reasonable to suggest that my annual average increase in salary will be about 1.5%. And you know, I'm not ashamed to disclose that by the time I retire then, or if I retire in this formula, my salary will be about $200,000. The other important assumption in this calculation is this amount. Here it shows you what my money purchase is, so you can all know how much I got in the bank in terms of there, but the important point there is it's a 3% rate of return. Now, personally, we all know that, well, for me, myself, I'm going to make a 6% return on average over those years, right? Well, you can adjust it however you want. 3% is conservative, granted, but it gives you what your estimated pension is. So that is the monthly, multiply by 12, you get $84,000. So I was wondering, well, how does that compare versus, let's say I did the phased retirement, and I started it at 65 and I worked to 68. And while I was being able to reduce my duties and get some of my own time back for myself, how does that compare with, say, continuing to work and having a fully activated pension as we have the choice to do now? Well, the increases over just those 3 years are pretty substantial. So this is what you see. Here I have age 68, the same basic assumptions, 1.5% annual salary increase, a 3% return on the money purchase. And it bumps up the monthly to 84,000, which gives me a total annual pension of 101,000. So a pretty substantial gain from 3 years of additional full credit service. And so if you're going to make comparisons about how does it look from here versus there, you really have to be clear about what your assumptions are. And I would say take the time to sit down with someone like Bob Weisenagel to say, okay, this is where you're at. Here's how this change might impact you. The last thing I want to share before I open it up for questions and comments is this last page, which is, it's already up, so some of you may have already discovered it, but if you're wondering where you could do a deeper dive on all of the information about the University Pensions Project or the university's pension plan, you have universitiespension.ca, and so you can see the brutal details of the history of development over the last 3.5 years, but most importantly, you can see for yourself what the details of the plan design are. So as I mentioned, if you're comparing the minimum benefit guarantee to the UPP, we see that our accrual rates below the yearly maximum pensionable earnings under the proposed UPP is 1.6%. Currently, it's 1.4% in the QPP. So that's about a 14% increase in terms of the value of your money in terms of going into the pension. So when we think about the shift from QPP to UPP, we're thinking, well, if we go out on money purchase versus UPP, how do we do? And here, if we also look at the above the yearly maximum pensionable earnings, it's a 2% accrual rather than 1.8% accrual. That's about 11% increase. And on average, at least according to our actuaries, that's the value of the money purchase top-up for most faculty who have retired from Queen's. So if we're thinking about what's the ballpark estimate, we've heard 10% is on average. Now, it varies by individual, it varies by market performance, it varies by all of those assumptions I just talked about. But if we think about UPP accrual versus QPP minimum benefit guarantee, we can see the changes on this site. So please do take a moment to visit that, and you can also see the details of what does the consent process look like and how is that going to happen. And that's it. So I'll open it up for questions. David.
I have to scoot because I have a student presentation at 2 o'clock. Oh, I'm David Gordon from the Department of Geography and Planning. And I regret I have to speak and run for teaching purposes. But I just wanted to congratulate the bargaining team and on this. I think it's a great piece of work. And I'll certainly be voting in favor of both deals. And as someone approaching 65, I'm immensely grateful for both the consideration towards my future pension and also the option for the early retirement. I'll be looking at that very carefully. I was planning to work till 70. Now I can see this would be very interesting to be invoking, in 2 or 3 years. So I want to thank you so much for your work and getting this new option in front of us.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Elizabeth. My talk will be slightly less cheerful than my friend David, but I want to preface my comments by saying...
Identify yourself.
Oh, yeah, Art Cofield, Faculty of Law. Preface my comments. I am grateful. It's easy to sling arrows from the outside, and I know you've been working on this for years, and it is appreciated, but, a couple of tough questions. So it's my understanding when this JSPP process started, there were 20 universities involved. 17 of them have dropped out. All of the hybrid plan universities dropped out, and so we're left with us and 2 universities that have a dissimilar plan. So our current plan is actually quite strong from a QUFA member's perspective. We get to take our salary and full pension simultaneously at age 65. We get to commute the value of our pension currently for people with health problems and so on. And there are other benefits as well. So for instance, the university is contributing, 55% or 60%. We put in 40%, say, of every monthly pension contribution. So under the new system, we lose the ability to keep working at 65. We lose the commuted value of our pension. Our contributions go up. The university's contributions go down. It seems like a significant loss. We've talked about this before. I know it varies under individual circumstances, but let's say we have a faculty member who's 62, won't be kind of grandfathered into the new system. She intends to keep working at a pension of $100,000 per year. After 6 years, she'd have $600,000 before tax in her pocket. The only offset of all of these benefits that I've seen is the notion we can keep going to 68 and there'll be 3/4 of 1 year's salary. But compare that person that intends to keep going. She's lost not $600,000, but and certainly hundreds of thousands of dollars under the new plan. And so can you explain to us, why did Queen's stick with this plan
Sure.
when everybody else dropped out? And are there any real offsets for all the stuff we've given away? Thank you.
Well, Art, let me start by correcting some factual errors in your assertions there. The first one is this question about commuted value. It is a loss, but it's not an immediate loss, meaning you can continue to take your commuted value with a phase-out period. So we didn't get kind of the full red circle, everyone in the room today is guaranteed it,
Right.
but there's a phase-out period. So the first 3 years you can take your commuted value, both the QPP portion and the UPP portion. So if the UPP starts on 2021, you'll be able to do that until 2024. After that, you can still take your commuted value of the QPP, so for additional 7 years. So there's a 10-year window period in which people will still be able to take their commuted value. So to say that we lose that is just factually wrong.
But after the 10 years,
So after
it's
the
gone.
10 years, after 2031, yes, if after age 55 you lose that. So for me, that's my loss. I'm set to retire at 2034 in terms of when I hit 65. I won't have access to that. Everyone else in this room who hits 65 before 2031 will have access. This is a loss. But the one thing I want to differentiate is you're conflating the loss of choice with the loss of value. And I think it's really important that we be clear that we fundamentally disagree with the loss of choice to the extent that we've lost choices like the commuted value and like the right to draw your pension. But our objective here was to create a future for ourselves and a future for our future colleagues in terms of a stable, sustainable pension plan that has a jointly sponsored governance structure to it, to join with our colleagues from the University of Toronto, to join with our colleagues from the University of Guelph, and I anticipate additional universities coming in. In terms of how you actually do the nitty-gritty work of getting this plan design finalized, it's impossible to do with 20 people with divergent interests in the room. We brought together what we thought were the primary partners to make a real plan viable, which is our colleagues from Toronto and our colleagues from Guelph. The question about continuing to work while drawing salary, you're right. The important thing is that that's before tax. So if I take my example here, and this is exactly what I calculated out, if I add the pension amount to my salary amount, my tax rate goes up for the entire salary plus pension. Yeah, from 38% to 42%. I calculated this out, by the way. And so the real take home is going to be reduced by over 50% in terms of the actual tax experienced on that pension value of money. If I did the other scenario of entering the phased retirement, so I'm weighing the 75% of salary as kind of an offset, and then I'm going to take pension in years 4, 5, and 6, meaning I retire at 68 and then I go to 71. What's the actual after-tax reality for me? And here again, I need to disclose the assumptions that I'm making, because I think for a robust debate, we have to be clear about what our assumptions are, is that I'm not pension income splitting. So currently under CRA, and this is one of the advantages of being able to draw a pension and continue to work, I could give my spouse half my pension, and that would reduce my tax exposure. I didn't want to do that because we can't assume that everyone in the Queen's plan is going to be retiring with a spouse who has room for pension income splitting. I didn't assume that I was able to shift money to other tax shelters, and I think everyone who does that will be sophisticated enough to have some mechanisms for protecting against additional tax. But if we're just looking at the after-tax actual benefits, and that's what I did, between continuing to work at that salary and taking a phased retirement and then getting my retirement benefits, you are right. I lost about $6,500, not $600,000 in real money. And then the last assumption that you need to be clear about is how long do I live after age 71? If I die by the time I'm 72, I'll rise from my grave and say, Art, I wish I would have listened to you because I would have been better off from your way. But I'd be dead. And so who really wins that debate? So again, when we think about the assumptions, we have to think about, well, when are you going to die? And is it better for me to continue to accrue credit and have a better pension when I go, or will I be better off drawing my salary, and figuring out a way to try and protect it from taxes. So yeah, I think the phased retirement offset provides a real value to members. And like I said, we have to be clear about the loss of choice versus the loss of value. I think we're protecting the value for the long term, even if we're losing some choice in the short term. And I think that's a loss. That's not something we want. But it's not as though we simply say no and then expect everything to be fine, right? This is something that we bargain. And the employer is going to have a very aggressive position in terms of how they figure out their way of solving this pension issue for them. And yeah, if we have the strength to say no and take it on and maintain our stance, great. But I think this is a better option. Let me go up here, and then if you could go to the mic, sir.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Elizabeth, very much. Sorry, I don't know why I keep forgetting. Eleanor MacDonald, Politics. My question is just about, it's just a technical question, really. I understand that some of what you bargained, what you listed under consent bargaining, I'm just wondering, when is that activated? So presumably aspects of the collective agreement renewal begin in April 2019, but those things that you have bargained as part of the consent bargaining, and that would include things, like the salary offset for cost increases or the very popular phase out and early retirement. Are those activated with when the new collective agreement begins, or are they activated in July 2021, presuming that all of this goes through?
Great question. Just to be clear, the elements on that consent track are all dependent upon what they call the accrual date to the UPP. Meaning, if consent doesn't happen and the UPP isn't formed, well, we won't get a salary offset. And perhaps most importantly, without consent and without conversion, Queens is not going to establish an early retirement program for us and for other current beneficiaries of the QPP. And that's one important thing that reminded me, because I think we have a misperception about the value of unreduced early retirement for our colleagues within the faculty ranks. We assume that I'm going to continue working past 65, I'm going to, this is what I do. We asked for the retirement data for the last 6 years. And last year, we had as many of our colleagues retiring before 65 as we did having retiring after 65. I don't know if that's just a blip in the data. Typically, it's been about 30% retire before 65 versus after 65. But if it's a fundamental shift in pension preferences and pension habits, I would see that the establishment of an unreduced early retirement factor 80, right, you need 60 years plus 20 to get 80, as an important shift in our benefit program.
And just because, to be clear, that would not begin until the unreduced retirement benefit would not begin until July 2021.
That's correct. It doesn't begin until the new plan, what they call the accrual date for the new plan.
All right. All these questions are bound to be selfish, right? But thank you very much.
Eleanor, they're all selfish. And all.
Leslie, before you, gentlemen, did you want to go to the mic, please?
Hi, Steve Blostein from Electrical and Computer Engineering. No, just to tie in with what your previous answer, I mean, the bigger point is not really this is talking about taking pensions early, but it seems to me the accrual of the value, the money purchased tax-free for several years is actually way more than anything else we're describing. So I mean, if somebody were to say to me, I'm going to take my pension at 65 and then work for six years versus simply work and keep the pension going until 71, you're going to get almost about a 50% higher pension. I mean, so if you look at where it comes from, it's just the accruing pension over without, like when it's in the pension plan, it's like 3% a year, and after tax it would be very hard to match 3% because that's like 6% or something after tax.
You're quicker on your feet in terms of calculations than I am, but I'd say use this tool and it'll give you a very concrete estimate of exactly what you're saying in terms of the returns on your money purchase.
Just as a quick thing, I unfortunately had to come here late, but the unreduced early retirement, is that only on the UPP portion after 2021, or has it now been changed?
The proposal is that it be extended to your QPP accrued benefits as well. So it'll be harmonized. So there's no more thinking of, am I going to lose 2% a year if I go out early on my QPP portion versus the UPP portion?
So I'd like to just answer part of one of the questions about when things phase in. The only thing that comes in early, it comes in 2019, July 1st, 2019, is the harmonized retirement date. So as long as QUFA gives consent to convert, which depends on you telling us you'd like to go, then on July 1, 2019, the new retirement date rules take effect, even though the UPP is not yet, hasn't yet come into existence as a plan. So that's just a clarification. Now I'm also doing questions from people who are not able to attend in person, and I have a question from Susan Brott. How does sabbatical leave close to retirement affect this process?
You won't be able to take it during the phased retirement. So I think that's kind of the main question, right? Otherwise, there's always the perennial question of, well, I want to take sabbatic and then I want to retire. Don't tell me, I don't want to know. There are expectations that you come back from a sabbatic and continue to work. I don't want to know, I guess, is my response if that's your plan.
Charlotte Reinholtz, LLCU. So this is a troll under the bridge question. I hope that it's completely not relevant. But here's the deal. Time and time again, we see the government allowing big corporations to not pay out the pensions when they go bankrupt and leave the country. And I'm just wondering, what is there in place to prevent the government from allowing our university to not pay off the deficit?
Well, let me answer your question in a couple of ways. The first way is what policy objective is achieved by going into a multi-employer JSPP model. And this is one of the fundamental government policy objectives is you spread out the risk. If any single institution fails, the other institutions are there to continue the plan. The problem is under single employer plans, the government may have exposure in terms of will they be called upon to pay into the insured pensions. It's unlikely, and we tend to discount, and so I'm not going to speculate, well, what if Queens winds up? And I'm sure some of our kind of bankruptcy colleagues in law could do a better job of explaining kind of creditor status for employee pensions, but my understanding is that employee pensions aren't at the top of the list of ensuring payouts from a defunct entity.
No, they definitely are not. But no, it was just, I would expect that some members like myself do naively wonder whether we are equally vulnerable. But maybe we'll get a firm answer coming forth from someone. Thank you.
Thanks. One point that Elizabeth mentioned that I did want to emphasize in terms of another aspect of the JSPP is that we have governance voice a voice that we don't currently have within the QPP. I'm sure some of you will be at the pension AGM, the QPP pension AGM this week, and we'll see how the returns did. It's always kind of like the unveiling event. But currently we, of course, have no accountability. The fund managers have no accountability directly to us as fund beneficiaries. But under the JSPP model, the sponsors, meaning the labor side and the employer side, have essentially an equal vote in hiring the fund manager, appointing the boards of directors. So if we're thinking about managing the fund in a way that has greater accountability, that would be the other feature that I would emphasize. Steve.
Yes, something I was wondering about with regard to that governance model. I guess the government is going to waive the the requirements to provide those payments, right? But I think if you look at this in the joint governance model, the government can say to the universities, look, you've got representation by your employees on these boards, and therefore we're going to have you guys worry about reducing pension benefits if there's some catastrophe. Like, in other words, because there's this joint governance, they can kind of wash their hands a little bit because now they say, oh, we give you governance, so you've got a role. Employees have a role now. Go and solve it. And I'm wondering about that.
Yeah. Well, we have to solve it, right? JSPPs can't go into deficit, so you have various levers. There aren't many. You either increase contributions or decrease benefits. Art, there was one other thing that your question triggered in my mind that we took a look at during bargaining, which was what are current faculty members doing right now in terms of working, having activated their pension versus working while continuing to accrue additional benefits? And we find it's actually 50-50. So as of when we asked for the information during bargaining, 43 QUFA members have activated their pension and continue to work. Now that's a little wonky because 28 of them are over 71, and I'm not going to point anyone out in this room who fits that category. But even under the UPP, once you reach 71, you're obligated to start taking your pension benefits. So if we're just looking at those between 75 and 71, we have 15 colleagues right now in that category. We have 42 colleagues between 65 and 71 who are continuing to accrue their pension benefits. So if we're thinking about loss of a choice, absolutely. Loss of value, not as clear.
Can you go to your mic,
Mary Louise Adams, kinesiology. Very quick question. When you talk about the people who are retiring early and the people who are saying, do you have gender data on that?
Yes, we do.
Could you tell it?
Yeah. And this is probably not a surprise. So in the people who have activated their pension, out of the 15, 2 are women, 13 are men. There's clearly a gendered, I had this discussion with my wife, and I said, well, we just don't know what to do with ourselves, and so we're not, leaving employment. In terms of the early retirement breakdown, it's actually a bit more balanced. In the most recent data that we have for early retirees, it's almost 50-50, which was interesting. We were expecting to see the same gender imbalance. And over those 6 years, there may have been a year or two in which was predominantly women, but the data are not quite clear in that.
Francine Barish from the library. I'm glad to see the phase-out retirement benefit. It's not something that I'll personally be able to take advantage of, but I wonder if the university has considered, you alluded to the deterioration of working conditions, and I imagine that many are going to leverage this phase-out retirement option with reduced appointments. And my experience with reduced appointments is they're often a reduced time to do 100% of the work, and staff complements are not allocated equivalently, and that could mean a huge deterioration of working conditions for those who do not have that option. And I wonder if the universities sort of thought about what uptake of that option would look like, not to discourage, but to just sort of allude to the realities of reduced appointments. I wonder if there's...
I see Professor Hanson shaking her head. Let me turn it to her.
We were very clear, and this may not console you, that they could not have a limitation on the ability of individuals to use this in order to manage the labor problems in units, because that would be extremely unfair to individuals who are in units that have already been withered. You know, in the Faculty of Arts and Science, we're obviously in a very different position than faculties like business and law that have bulked up. So yes, it could happen that you could find yourself, you know, in your springy youthfulness being the last woman standing while everybody else is phasing down. The more optimistic version of that is that it's enabling succession planning and will give strong arguments to units to do a little, you know, what we used to do in the days of my youth, which was bridging appointments. You know, that they knew that X was going, and so they get somebody else in already to fill the space.
That's a nice thought.
Another thing is that the time that you take the reduction is not restricted. So you can't, people are not going to be able to have a year when they are at 25% of service, and it will allow some movement there.
Okay. Oh.
Leslie, you have
someone's asking for clarification, I think, on the lower limit of responsibility.
Yeah, so the point of the phase is that you're doing 200% of your responsibilities over 3 years. So the 3 years is 300%. You can't have a year in which you're just there 25%. That would mean that you could create a sabbatical for yourself in the middle, for example, that you have a year that you're at 75%, a year at 0, and a year at 75%, and then gone. That was all.
Okay, I have a question from Hélène Willette-Kuntz. And the question is an easy one. She missed the first part of the meeting. Will the recording be available? Yes.
Sorry, you're at 100%, 100%.
Hi, Hélène.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yes, hopefully you heard Leslie's answer.
Elizabeth would like to clarify her math.
I meant that you could use that to have 100% year, a 0, and 100%, not.
I didn't want to leave that unrecorded.
To the previous question, though, we did have some unit heads wanting us to bargain on behalf of the unit to capture the money from those reduced responsibilities, and QUFA we don't currently have a mandate to bargain on behalf of units, so we know that it's a concern for folks who might be leaving their colleagues alone, but it's not something we have control over.
Thanks.
Lake Danishman from Mining Engineering. The example you put up, Greg, the example up there has the phased retirement starting at 65 to 68. What is the earliest date at which you can start the phased retirement?
62.
Is there an upper limit?
No. I mean, you have to take your pension at 71, though.
Okay, but there's nothing before 71?
No.
Thank you.
Could you phase from 68 to 71?
Yeah, but you'd have to be complete with your phase prior to reaching 71, before you have to take your pension.
Yeah, and we also negotiated that if you've already triggered your pension, you can do the phase, but you don't get any bonus salary. So the notion of, having a plan to phase out your responsibilities is available to everybody, even those who have already triggered their QPP, but they just don't get a bonus. They don't get a pension buyout for granting their bosses certainty about their retirement date.
Rick Sellens, Mechanical and Materials Engineering. Now that my department head has left the room, I can look more interested in this phased program.
It is being recorded, and it will be.
Yes, I'm aware. We're getting a bunch of questions about this, and it seems that some of us are not doing the math as fast as others. Do we actually have the nature of this program written down somewhere that could be shared with members so that we can plug it into our spreadsheets and think about it ourselves when we get home?
Yeah, we have to, we have the basic outline in our tentative agreement. We need to sit down with the university to finalize the longer version of it, but it's essentially the University of Toronto phased retirement program. If you look that up, that's the model
it's
that we're
going to be
using.
very close to the U of T plan.
Exactly.
Okay, thank
With
you.
the only primary difference is the university is concerned about a rush to the gate, and so what we agreed is that we'll work with them in terms of people who are under 65 at units that have that demographic bulge, but we insisted that you can't delay someone for more than 1 year from going into the plan, right? Because if you remember back in 2010, there was a buyout, but it was kind of very constrained in terms of one person at this unit, one person at that unit. We said there can't be those restrictions for what will be an ongoing plan, and hopefully this will, once it settles out, provide a tool for appropriate succession planning in units.
Yeah, I have a question, Rob. Early on, you talked about one of your goals, your collective goals, of creating a plan for future generations of scholars and artists. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the impact of the solvency payments, as you understand it, on the university. What kind of impact, if we don't go to the UPP, might we experience as employees of Queen's?
Well, I can't speak for how Queen's would manage their special solvency payments, but if you look at, and this document's available on the Queen's pension site, if you look at their September 30th, 2017 valuation statement, you can see that the wind-up solvency, and that's the unlikely event that Queen's will shut down, it increased to $313 million. And the going concern, which Elizabeth alluded to as kind of our intergenerational debt transfer, how much we're making people behind us pay for our accrued pension benefits, reduced significantly from 127 million down to about 31, 33 million. And those two combined require special solvency payments of an estimated $19 million a year, at least within the valuation document for the next 3 to 5 years. That could go up depending upon changes to government mandates of special solvency payments. And again, this is driven fundamentally by government policy, not by necessarily the health of the plan. So Art is absolutely right on that point. This is a government stick forcing single employer universities to form a JSPP. How the university continues to manage those budgets, it only comes from one place, and that's us in the units.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Rob or Elizabeth? Oh, I'm sorry, Amy.
Hi, Amy Kaufman from the library. Rob, I'm really thankful for the wonderful job you and your team have done. I think it's a wonderful plan, and I'm very excited about it. I just had a question. If someone was an adjunct teaching a course, say, here at Queen's, and then also teaching a course at, say, U of T or Guelph, do those both get counted toward the same pension eligibility and benefits?
You would ask that question. You know, that was something that has been discussed during the plan design process, and I might ask Paul to jump in, although he's not looking all that eager. I don't think that issue has ultimately been resolved. The problem is reaching eligibility at any single institution versus coordinating the trigger to eligibility for the plan as a whole.
I think it stands, although it may not be written in stone, that if you are an employee of any member of the university pension plan, those credits will accrue from both sides. That is, your work at each institution would add together towards your work history.
Right. And I know I've gone way over time, so.
Yeah, are there any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Lida Raptis from DBMS. I was just wondering, in the past, especially older people like me who remember times when inflation was huge, is there any kind of cost of living indexation? If we hit a high inflation, what's going to happen?
So a couple of things. First, for the QPP accrued benefits, what you have in the formation of the UPP will be the same indexation formula as currently exists for your QPP benefits. And recall, those are a bit unusual. The indexation is based upon better than 6% rate of return. And this is an area where we insisted on replication, where replication may not have been the best choice for us, but replication was a principle that we felt members could see that your accrued benefits will not change. Under the UPP, and the more common formula for protection against inflation is what they call a percentage of the consumer price index. And so under the UPP, it'll be 75% of the consumer price index. So if the consumer price index goes up by 2%, your indexation will be 1.5.
Because last time I got 1%.
And that's the unusual formula of QPP indexation. It's all based upon your rate of return, and that's impossible to project out. So under the new plan, you'll have a stable or at least a predictable return. Now, that said, some years if the QPP returns do really well, you could be making out like a bandit.
But by then you may be dead.
But then you may be dead, exactly. So at least in terms of those of us who are going to have a portion in QPP and a portion in UPP, our QPP indexation will be based upon the same metrics as exists today. The benefits that we accrue in the UPP will be a bit more predictable at 75% of CPI.
Why not be just a CPI? You know, adjust. You don't ask for a raise, but to keep the same.
Being able to assess the trade-off between our current indexation model and a 75% of CPI indexation model, everyone's going to assume that we're going to be making 20% returns and our indexation will be 14% year over year, right? We just will think that. Whereas, you know, having a more stable, predictable, but not quite as rich plan may be better in the long term. And there are certain benefits to the Queen's indexation formula. We stand to get much better indexation if the funds perform well. And there's no question that it has tremendous upside.
Well, for the rest, then we need to find another job. But who's going to hire you at 70?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other questions. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Rob. We'll move on with the business portion of the meeting. We have written reports that were sent out as an email attachment for the treasurer. Ken, where? Yeah. There's no slides? No. Oh. All right, well, I'll put the agenda up then.
So the treasurer's interim written report came with your packages, and I hope you had some time to look through it. If you have any questions, let me know. As always, you can always ask me by email as well. Any questions? There be none. Thank you.
I love the fact that Ken always begins his report by saying, everything's fine, everything's going well. Are there any questions? We'll move on to the JCAA. Michael?
I don't really have anything new to report. We've kind of put JCA matters on the back burner while we've been doing bargaining, but I'm happy to answer any questions arising from my written report. Okay, thank you.
Well done. I'm getting a lot of exercise getting up and down. PAC, PACC. Oh, Jordan, there you are.
Thanks, Greg. As with the others, I had a written report, and I'm happy to take any questions about the written report, if there are any. Otherwise, I don't have anything to add except to say that PAC is a wonderful committee, and if you're interested in doing some QUFA service, joining PAC would be a wonderful way to do it. It's not a highly demanding committee to be on. It's generally speaking a meeting a month. It takes about an hour. And QUFA service counts towards our service requirements towards the university. So if you're interested in joining PAC, feel free to give me an email and we can talk about how you could help out. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jordan. Jordan's pitch for new members segues right into Leslie's talk about the nomination committee.
Thanks. So before I do that, I do this every year and shame people into participating in this wonderful committee. I do want to let you know that we have a couple of new people in the QUFA office. So Micheline Waring, who's here, has joined us. And if you have queries about the collective agreement, please address them to Micheline. She's very fast and very friendly. And Peggy Smith, where are you, Peggy? Peggy's way, way, way at the back. Peggy's also joined us to help us with our grievance portfolio. So you may or may not already know Peggy. All right, so I do the call out for volunteers for the QUFA Nominations Committee. We strike one every year at this time. The committee sits for approximately 3 months leading up to the spring AGM. We tend to only meet once and then do most of our work electronically, so it's a very kind of easy on your schedule kind of committee. And much of the work is just reaching out to your colleagues to see if they're interested in doing various kinds of committee work, other committee work, or taking on positions on the executive. So this year, Lynn Hanson, who's past president, is going to chair the committee. And from council, we have two members already determined, Chantal Brunette and Melissa Hotaling. So we need as well 2 members from this body who are not already on the executive or on council. Do I have any volunteers? Voluntold? You can nominate the guy beside you. You know I stand here until somebody puts their hand up, so.
I must remind us that this is our work. This isn't somebody else's work.
It's fun. It is. It's like it's really, right, Lynn? You get to ask people if they want to do volunteer work. Yeah.
And there are coffee and snacks in the QUFA office.
And I'm having a great, this is the work, and I'm having a great time doing it. Anybody willing to? Okay. I know there's been a lot of important work done today, so I'm going to perhaps let you off the hook, but you do know my email. It's jermynl, so my last name, first initial, @queensu.ca. And if you're shy about putting your hand up here, please contact me ASAP so we can get this committee rolling. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. Kyle, as he mentioned, our president, we'll answer questions. You got comments as well. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the complete committee, and I'll name them, and those who are still here can stand up or indicate themselves. Of course, our co-chief negotiators, Elizabeth Hanson and Rob Hickey, that you know. Our member from the pension committee, Paul Young. Mike White from the JCAA. He just left, I think.
He has kids. We have kids.
Melissa Hotaling from council. And Leslie German and Micheline Waring from staff support. I'd like to congratulate them. Remarkably, instead of 6 months, it took 6 meetings to get this agreement. Given that, as your president, I'll take any questions that don't concern matters already discussed. Well, seeing none, I'll let you call for adjournment.
Could I have a motion for adjournment? Eleanor? And we will adjourn the meeting at 2:46. Thank you very much.